For years, Princess Margaret of England found small, anonymous notes listing "things I hate about you." On one of them appeared an especially cruel line: "You look like a Jewish manicurist, and I hate you." Those notes were deliberately left by her own husband, Antony Armstrong-Jones. While the public saw a modern and sophisticated couple, their marriage was passing through a period marked by constant tension. Who was this man, capable of challenging royalty from within? Armstrong-Jones, later known as Lord Snowdon, was a celebrated society photographer whose life took a dramatic turn when he married the Queen's sister. His story was shaped by creative talent, defiance, and scandal, and for years he remained under relentless press scrutiny. Armstrong-Jones did not come from royalty. Indeed, his wedding to Margaret in 1960 broke with certain long-standing traditions of the British crown. It was the first time in many years that a princess had married a commoner, a man without a noble title, under the gaze of millions around the world. The ceremony at Westminster Abbey was magnificent and broadcast internationally. Before a global audience, the couple were presented as a symbol of a renewed monarchy. Yet behind the initial splendor, tensions soon surfaced. Accustomed to the artistic world and to a life far less structured, Armstrong-Jones moved in circles very different from those of the British court. The royal union began with immense expectations, but also with early signs that the path ahead would not be simple. Before reaching that decisive moment, it is worth stepping back to explore the origins and trajectory of this compelling figure. Antony Charles Robert Armstrong-Jones was born on the 7th of March 1930 in London, in the elegant district of Belgravia. The son of Ronald Armstrong-Jones, a Welsh barrister, and Anne Messel, who came from an aristocratic family, Tony, as he was known within the family, was the couple's only son. He had an elder sister, Susan, and grew up surrounded by distinguished influences. His maternal uncle was Oliver Messel, a renowned theatrical designer, and one of his great-grandfathers was the celebrated cartoonist Edward Linley Sambourne. Yet his family's social standing did not guarantee a happy childhood. His parents divorced when he was 5, after a marriage marked by conflict. Shortly afterwards, his mother remarried an Irish earl. Tony and his sister were raised between two very different environments. They spent periods with their father in London and others at their stepfather's castle in Ireland, where they often felt overshadowed by their half-siblings. This unstable family life left deep marks on the young boy. At 16, Antony faced a severe personal trial. During a holiday in Wales in 1946, he contracted polio, a disease that at the time could be devastating. He spent 6 months in hospital at the Liverpool Royal Infirmary while recovering. Neither of his parents visited him during that period. The only family member who came was his loyal sister, Susan. The illness left permanent consequences. His left leg was slightly shorter, and he carried a faint but lifelong limp. Those long months of isolation strengthened his independent streak and his preference for solitary pursuits. To distract him during his stay in hospital, his mother sent him a camera. He also showed an interest in mechanics and building small devices, but it was the camera that ultimately shaped his future. Armstrong-Jones received a privileged education. He attended Eton College, where he stood out more for his creative interests than for academic achievement. It was there that he began experimenting seriously with photography. He traded a microscope for a cheap camera and improvised developing trays from empty biscuit tins. In 1949, he went up to the University of Cambridge to study architecture. However, artistic vocation prevailed. After 2 years, having failed his final examinations, Antony left Cambridge and abandoned architecture altogether. Settling in post-war London, he began to make his way in photography. In the early days, he worked as an assistant to a society photographer, carrying equipment and performing minor tasks for a modest wage, barely £3 a week. In the latter half of the 1950s, Armstrong-Jones began to distinguish himself on his own merits within the worlds of society and theatrical photography. Through persistence and charm, he established his own studio in London and secured commissions for influential magazines such as Tatler, Picture Post, and Vogue, photographing young aristocrats, debutantes, and emerging stars. His approach departed from the rigid portrait style that had dominated previous decades. He sought naturalness and movement, in contrast to the more formal manner of photographers such as Cecil Beaton, known for his official portraits and his closeness to the court. In 1957, he was commissioned to photograph Queen Elizabeth II, alongside the Duke of Edinburgh and their children, Charles and Anne, in a tone unusual for the royal family. Armstrong-Jones approached the session with a more spontaneous eye, avoiding the traditional stiff pose. One of the images showed the young Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip crossing a small stone bridge, an informal moment that contrasted with established royal imagery. These portraits caused a stir at court and delighted British high society, marking a stylistic shift in how the monarchy was presented to the public. Following that commission, his work began to circulate beyond the United Kingdom. The artistic director Alexander Lieberman invited him to collaborate with the American edition of Vogue, where he worked for 12 years within the Condé Nast publishing group. By the late 1950s, he was frequently photographing leading cultural and political figures. Among his subjects were the actor Laurence Olivier, the novelist Barbara Cartland, the historian and spy Anthony Blunt, and the writer John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. At the same time, he began moving within London's most visible social circles. His connections opened doors, but it was his talent that sustained his position. Even Cecil Beaton acknowledged his rise in his diary, writing, "I do not think Armstrong-Jones's photographs are so interesting, but his publicity is tremendous. Being the newcomer in the field has its advantages." By the end of the decade, Armstrong-Jones had become one of the most sought-after photographers in London. It was during this period that he met Princess Margaret, the Queen's younger sister. They were introduced in 1958 at a dinner hosted by Lady Elizabeth Cavendish, one of the princess's ladies-in-waiting, where they spoke for the first time. A spark emerged between them at a delicate moment in Margaret's life. Only 3 years earlier, she had been forced, much against her wishes, to renounce the love of her life, Group Captain Peter Townsend, a divorced Royal Air Force hero whose relationship with her had been vetoed by the Crown as unsuitable. The break with Peter Townsend had deeply affected Margaret and left her with a more defiant attitude towards court conventions. In that context, Armstrong-Jones represented something entirely different from her usual circle. Tony did not belong to the traditional establishment. He was not overly formal with her. He treated her with natural ease and even dared to take her out of the palace incognito, away from the watchful eyes of security officers. In time, the princess began visiting Armstrong-Jones's studio in Pimlico. What had begun on a professional and social footing gradually developed into a romance. For a while, the courtship was kept discreet. Eventually, however, in February 1960, the official engagement was announced. The news surprised many. Tony did not belong to the aristocracy, nor was he wealthy. He was a successful but essentially ordinary photographer who was suddenly to become the first untitled commoner to marry a British princess in almost 4 centuries. He was 30, she was 29. The wedding was celebrated with great splendor on the 6th of May 1960 at Westminster Abbey. It was a historic occasion, broadcast on television to a worldwide audience of millions. After the ceremony, the newlyweds appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, in keeping with tradition, and later departed aboard the royal yacht Britannia for a Caribbean honeymoon. Upon their return, they settled into an elegant apartment at Kensington Palace. Armstrong-Jones's entry into the royal family was accompanied by honors. In October 1961, Queen Elizabeth II granted her brother-in-law his own peerage. He was created Earl of Snowdon and Viscount Linley, a step intended to ensure that any future children of the marriage would hold aristocratic titles by birth. In 1961, their first child was born, David Armstrong-Jones, who received the title Viscount Linley. In 1964, their daughter, Lady Sarah Armstrong-Jones, was born. To the press, the couple embodied a modern image in keeping with the cultural atmosphere of London in the 1960s. Snowdon continued to build his successful photographic career, while Princess Margaret carried out her royal duties and maintained an active social life. For a time, they projected stability and success, both professionally and domestically. That image, however, would gradually begin to unravel. The marriage of Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon began to fracture early on, and increasingly in public view. As the years passed, their differences became impossible to ignore. On the one hand, Margaret never forgot that she had renounced Peter Townsend under intense family pressure, and some close to her later suggested that she may have married Tony partly out of wounded pride or resentment towards her family over that forbidden love. On the other hand, Snowdon felt deeply out of place within the rigid structures of court life. He found royal formality and protocol profoundly tedious. Indeed, he continued traveling the world and accepting photographic commissions that kept him away from London for extended periods, something that surprised the princess in the early years of their marriage. Emotional distance gradually widened between them. In private, arguments and recriminations became frequent. By the mid-1960s, despite outward appearances, the couple were effectively leading separate lives under the same roof. Both Tony and Margaret sought comfort outside the marriage. Snowdon had acquired a reputation as a womanizer within the artistic circles he frequented. His charm and social ease facilitated constant romantic entanglements, and it was often said that he rarely declined an opportunity for flirtation. Within his professional environment, speculation also arose regarding his sexuality. Snowdon responded to such rumors by stating, "I never fell in love with a boy, but a few men have fallen in love with me." Years later, the decorator Nicholas Haslam, a close friend of Tony, wrote in his memoirs that he himself had had an affair with Snowdon before the royal wedding, and further claimed that Tony had been involved with the designer Tom Parr. In contrast, Princess Margaret wrestled with her own frustrations. Accustomed to being the center of attention, she struggled with her husband's professional drive and independence. She may have expected him to adapt more fully to royal life, yet Tony refused to surrender his identity. Tensions surfaced in their daily existence. Rumors began circulating in the press about extravagant parties, scenes of jealousy and unusual behavior within their home. It is known that both succumbed to excess. They moved within party circles where alcohol flowed freely, and, according to later accounts, where drugs and stimulants of the psychedelic era were not uncommon. Their arguments frequently escalated into shouting matches. At social gatherings, witnesses observed Tony abruptly interrupting his wife mid-conversation, once telling her, "Do be quiet and let someone intelligent speak," humiliating her in front of guests. Margaret, for her part, could be sharp-tongued and temperamental, delivering cutting remarks when she felt overlooked. Episodes of mutual contempt became increasingly less discreet. Lord Snowdon would secretly leave handwritten notes in places where his wife would find them, entitled, "Things I Hate About You," listing his grievances. Margaret discovered them with evident hurt. The notorious note comparing her to a Jewish manicurist, later documented by biographers such as Sarah Bradford and Anne de Courcy, illustrates the depth of resentment that had taken root. Snowdon frequently escaped the palace whenever possible, retreating to his country home accompanied by a lover or accepting overseas assignments that provided convenient reasons to remain away for weeks at a time. Margaret, too, sought distraction. Surrounded by bohemian friends, she attended late-night parties on the private island of Moustique and, as later became known, engaged in relationships of her own. The situation erupted publicly in the mid-1970s. In 1976, British tabloids published photographs of Princess Margaret holidaying with a much younger man, Roddy Llewellyn. Tony initially adopted the stance of the aggrieved husband in the press, though privately he was well aware that his own conduct had contributed to the collapse of the marriage. Unable to sustain the facade of a happy union, Margaret and Snowdon separated shortly after the revelations regarding Roddy. In May 1978, it was announced that divorce proceedings would begin. The divorce was finalized on the 5th of July 1978. The separation marked the end of an era. The rebellious princess and the charismatic photographer, once icons of 1960s London, had been consumed by their own excesses and disillusionment. In the aftermath of the divorce, further revelations added a scandalous epilogue to their story. Decades later, it emerged that Armstrong-Jones had fathered a daughter outside marriage at the very beginning of his life with Margaret. Indeed, during the third week after the royal wedding in 1960, a close friend of Tony's, Camilla Fry, gave birth to a daughter named Polly. The child was raised by Camilla and her husband, Jeremy Fry, without public suspicion at the time. Yet within high society, rumors had long circulated that Polly might be Armstrong-Jones's daughter. Those suspicions were confirmed in 2004, when a DNA test requested by Polly Fry established that Lord Snowdon was indeed her biological father. After divorcing Princess Margaret, Lord Snowdon did not take long to rebuild part of his personal life. In late 1978, barely 5 months after the divorce, Antony, aged 48, entered into a civil marriage with Lucy Mary Lindsay Hogg, an English film and television producer. Lucy was discreet and came from comfortable circles. She had also worked with Tony as a photographic assistant, and it was widely rumored that their romantic relationship had begun even before Snowdon's official separation. The wedding took place privately on the 15th of December 1978. In July 1979, the Countess of Snowdon gave birth to a daughter, Lady Frances Armstrong-Jones. The child was born 7 months after the marriage. For a time, Tony appeared to lead a quieter life with Lucy and their daughter, stepping away from the glare of scandal that had defined his first marriage. He maintained a good relationship with his 2 elder children, David and Sarah, and even with the British royal family. Despite the divorce, Queen Elizabeth II and other members of the family continued to invite him to certain occasions, recognizing his cultural contributions. Nevertheless, Snowdon's restless nature never entirely subsided. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he continued working intensely, traveling in pursuit of photographic assignments and design projects, and, as later emerged, engaged in further extramarital affairs. By the late 1990s, these indiscretions placed increasing strain on his second marriage. In 1997, the journalist Anne Hills, with whom he had maintained a long-standing relationship, took her own life. Subsequent media coverage brought aspects of his private life into the public eye that had previously remained more discreet. Shortly afterwards, another difficult reality became impossible to ignore. At the age of 67, the Earl had fathered a child with a much younger woman. The mother was Melanie Cable Alexander, a magazine editor, who in April 1998 gave birth to a son, Jasper, Armstrong-Jones's 5th child. This episode proved the final blow for Lucy Lindsay Hogg. In 2000, after more than 2 decades of marriage, she formally separated from Tony upon learning of the infidelity and the child born outside the marriage. Snowdon's second divorce was finalized sometime later, bringing to an end his last marital chapter. Thereafter, in his 70s, Lord Snowdon lived surrounded by close friends and occasional companions, but he never remarried. In his later years, he continued to work regularly. For decades, he collaborated with the Sunday Times magazine, and during the 1990s, he also published work in the Daily Telegraph. He developed design projects related to disability, including a wheelchair model aimed at improving mobility. Between 1995 and 2003, he served as rector of the Royal College of Art, supporting one of Britain's leading institutions for art and design education. His relationship with the royal family remained institutional and cordial. In 2006, he was commissioned to produce the official portrait marking Queen Elizabeth II's 80th birthday. At the same time, his professional legacy was increasingly recognized. In 2000, the National Portrait Gallery organized a major retrospective exhibition dedicated to his work. Over time, more than 100 of his portraits became part of the gallery's permanent collection. In 1999, when the House of Lords reformed its membership rules and removed most hereditary peers, Snowdon accepted a life peerage, Baron Armstrong-Jones of Nymans, granted by the Queen, enabling him to retain a seat as an independent member. He remained active until 2016, stepping down a year before his death. Antony Armstrong-Jones died peacefully on 13 January 2017 at his home in Kensington, London, aged 86. Following his passing, international media reflected on a life defined equally by artistic achievement and controversy. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. We hope you have enjoyed it. If you have anything to add, please share it in the comments section. Do leave us a like and share this link with friends and family so that more people can learn about this story. Thank you for following us, and if you have not yet subscribed, we invite you to do so and activate notifications, as we regularly publish historical content that may interest you. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.